I'd like to welcome everyone who's joined us today. We are so thrilled to be able to have Adam Snoke and Golnaz Hajiji with Selective here with us. We're specifically targeting this webinar today to property owners and managers, people who deal with property day in and day out for their business. And are wanting to specifically address property-specific risks and focus on some things that you can really do to look and become more attractive to the insurance marketplace. So with that introduction, let's go ahead and turn the time over to Adam and Golnaz for a minute. Let them introduce themselves.
Thank you very much, Dan. I'm Adam Snoke. I am the territory manager for Selective Insurance in the state of Arizona and New Mexico. I work with a team of underwriters to essentially assess risk and what we're going to charge for such risk. And I look forward to speaking with all of you today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dan, for having us. My name is Golnaz. I am the risk management supervisor with Selective Insurance, managing Colorado, Idaho. I have to keep thinking about that because that just recently got changed. Colorado, Idaho, and New Mexico. I do also have a team of individuals, which we refer to risk management specialists, that go out and do surveys and assess risks and help our policyholders and agency partners with identifying some exposures and helping them with coming up with best practices and implementing resources and best practices in order to mitigate from some future losses and claims.
All right. Well, thank you both. So as how we wanted to kind of format this today is I'm going to be asking some general questions. I'm going to bring up some different topics. And as we do that, Adam and Golnaz will kind of just go back and forth answering those. If any of you who are participating have any questions as we're going along, you can submit those to us in one of two ways. You can either use the Q&A located within Zoom on the menu, or you can put a question directly into the chat. We've enabled you to be able to do that, and we'll try and answer those as they come up, or you can save questions till the end and we can answer those as well at that point. So with that being said, let's maybe start. Adam, if you want to maybe kick this off for us by discussing some trends, like what has been happening this last year in the property market regionally that you've seen, and then what are you guys kind of forecasting here for this coming year?
So, and thanks for asking that question, because I think it's important to kind of level set about where we are and the importance of some of the things we're going to talk about as we move through this discussion. But for the last decade, we'll say the big driver and the big focus item for insurers has been commercial and personal auto. There's been a lot of challenges around that line of business for a number of reasons. But what we've seen in the last few years is an emergence of loss deterioration on the property line of business as well. Once again, there's a number of reasons for that. Some of which are cat activity has been up and not just up, but is showing itself in areas of the country that historically our models are not built to forecast. So we're seeing cat events that are different than what we've historically seen in certain areas. Some of these cat events are more severe, and a lot of that is just as particularly a lot of the population has moved further west, where we have much higher concentration of property values in parts of the country that historically we did not have. And then the cost of goods and services has obviously gone up, as everyone's aware, which has drove up the cost to repair damaged structures in the event of a loss. So property, which has historically been a line that's been, particularly in this part of the country, carve out Colorado. Colorado is a little unique in its where it sits, but really in your southwestern states, particularly in Arizona, a state that has very limited cat activity, has been a solid line of business. That has shifted over the last number of years, and now property has become as big of a driver of poor loss performance as auto within the industry. And because of that, we've seen an increase in, first and foremost, rate that's being charged in the property line of business. Number two, reduction in coverages and more so like putting more skin in the game from policyholders in the form of higher deductibles. And then lastly is just a reduction in some availability of insurance, and particularly around, as we're going to talk later, number one, certain classes of business that historically are a little bit challenging, but the big driver right now is around wildfire exposed properties, particularly in this part of the country. That is becoming year after year a bigger hot button topic in the industry.
Okay. Thank you. You mentioned briefly classes of business. Are there certain classes of business that are particularly difficult to get at this point?
Yeah. So the big two that I would say that are property driven right now are habitational and hotels. They both share some similarities. They both are a little unique in certain situations. But Nationwide historically was the largest HAB writer in the U.S. And about a year and a half ago, they essentially pulled out of HAB, which flooded the marketplace and caused a lot of disruption in that space. And it forced a lot of that business to go excess and surplus, even stuff that was historically looked at as best in class HAB. And the market still has not recentered there. Are there carriers that are open for business in HAB? Yes, but it looks very different than it looked. Let's just call it 5 years ago. There's a lot of stuff now that would have been, top tier HAB business that's now finding its way into the excess and surplus markets. And the stuff that's really finding itself to standard carriers is essentially new construction, high-end HAB. This has been the thing that was so surprising about what we saw, particularly around HAB, is usually you kind of see it coming. There's a little bit of snowball snowball effect as this is starting to emerge. This happened very, very swiftly, and it was something that was much more rapid than I've seen at any point in my career. From a class of business that by all intents and purposes fits very well into the standard market, going excess and surplus.
So for some of our clients who may be in the habitational or hotel industries, any high-level advice that you'd send their way?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple things. Some things you can do, you can do things about. Others that are a little more challenging. Look, older non-sprinklered, whether it's HAB or hotels, those are going to be difficult to place at this point. And when I say difficult to place, they're going to be difficult to place in a standard market. And you really can't do anything about the age of your building. It is what it is. Can you update it? Can you maintain it? Absolutely. But that's one of the factors that I would say you kind of got what you got in that regard. But what you can do is certainly, preventative maintenance is huge, and just general maintenance of the property in general. We always say, like in insurance, like the first thing I tell my team when we're looking at a property account is you go and you pull a picture of the structure, because a picture tells 1,000 words. And you can learn a lot about a risk just by looking at what the condition of the property is, how it's maintained, how the landscaping is around the building. Those things are very, very important, because you want to create in the underwriter's mind, when the first opinion that they have of this risk is positive if they look at it if your building is properly maintained and updated. Golnaz, I think a little bit later on, will dig in a little bit more to, like, from a technical perspective, what that looks like from like roof, HVAC, plumbing, etc. But the biggest thing on difficult classes of business is you want to position it to be a best-in-class risk, given the characteristics of the risk that you're trying to insure.
Okay, excellent. That is great. So Golnaz, let's switch to you then, and maybe let's start kind of at a high level as well. When you have a lot of history doing property inspection, you now manage a team that does that. What are some of the key things? Like, I don't want to say top 10, but what are some of those real high level things that when inspecting property that are kind of like either the red flags or the really important issues?
Absolutely. So as Adam just alluded, I think property maintenance is something that no matter what type of property you have, whether it's a hotel, it's a school, or an office building, or even a warehouse, you need to have a pretty robust maintenance maintenance program in place. And when I say robust, doesn't mean that it has to be a document of 200 pages. It's something that is trackable It's something that you know what needs to be repaired and what has been done and the frequency. So whether you have a team of maintenance individuals that are on top of it, or it's a one-man shop and you are kind of maintaining as it comes. Maintenance, property maintenance, and building age, as Adam also mentioned, are very important in order to be proactive and kind of get ahead of some of the issues that could lead into much larger concerns, downtime, claims, or just significant damages to the building. So when we talk about maintenance, obviously there are so many things that go in place with regards to maintenance. Just some common elements, your roof has to be properly inspected. And again, when I say properly inspected, ideally we want a third-party vendor that's specialized in this type of line of work. But we understand that is not always feasible depending on the size of the operations or the business that you have going on. But a visual inspection of the roof, it's something that should be done in-house at least frequently. Depending on where you are geographically, I know you folks are in Arizona, but let's say if you have a property in Colorado, we definitely want a more frequent roof inspection just because of the nature that we have here. We have higher incidence of hail and high wind, but some sort of a property roof inspection that should be done at least in-house just to make sure the roof surface, just a visual inspection of what you can identify visually. It should be pretty straightforward. You're not, you should be looking for areas where there could be, around the drainage, where there could be water settling. So maybe there's a problem with the drainage or the flashing of the roof. If it's lifted off, that's an area where, you could potentially have water damage after a rainstorm or a monsoon season. Obvious cracks and small holes on the surface of the roof, those should be identified and repaired as needed. And then the same thing with HVAC system, regular maintenance of those systems. Typically, if we are talking about larger mechanical equipment, they are typically on some sort of a biannual or annual inspection that get done by third-party contractors. So that is, again, that's very ideal, changing filters and things like that, making sure all the pipes and wirings are in place. Same thing with plumbing, making sure that if you have areas where, again, I understand you guys are in Arizona, but unheated areas with plumbing, in case the temperature drops significantly to where there could be some potential water freezing in those areas, that could also lead into a significant water damage within the building, or even just a broken pipe or a faucet in the bathroom. Again, certain things obviously we can't visually see, but just being on top of a small leak can go such a long way in preventing from having a major claim or a major repair that you have to deal with. The other area as far as maintenance that, I think every property owner should definitely be on top of is the electrical. Newer buildings, not so much of an issue. We hope that, everything was put in and designed per building codes and national electric codes. So we do have a higher confidence with newer buildings, but as the buildings start aging, we have to make sure that, some of those systems and electrical wirings are up to date, and they're, they have enough load and capability to handle the demand of the property. One of the things that we actually perform here when we go out in the field, we have infrared thermographic cameras, which we scan the electrical panels to try to identify hotspots. And hotspots typically are a sign of some sort of an electrical, deficiency, which you may or may not be able to identify by just touching the panel or even visually seeing it. So those are some of the basic measures that a lot of the property owners can take upon themselves to make sure that they're on top of the property maintenance to make sure that, again, nothing goes unnoticed, or if there's a small repair that gets done without it's too late. So that's a huge part. I think property maintenance is something that everyone can be proactive about. Some other elements, Adam mentioned the appearance of the building. One of the things that we pay attention to, it's not just how it looks, whether it's pretty or not, or modern or not. It all goes back to the maintenance. If you have a property with a ton of debris and weeds growing on the sides, that's a sign of lack of property maintenance, which it kind of goes back to how involved are you in making sure that everything else that goes with the building is getting done and getting maintained and updated. Other things like crime prevention. You want to make sure that depending on where the building is located, and obviously the policyholders, they know exactly the areas that whether we have there's a higher concentration of homeless. And I was just in Arizona a couple months ago, and I was in some areas of Phoenix where it was a huge encampment down the valley from where the building was located. That's a huge concern, not just from a crime standpoint, but also from an arson and building fire standpoint. In the industry, we've seen that unfortunately numerous times where these individuals try to get into the building, not necessarily to steal something, which that also happens, but they're trying to get in to basically provide an environment for themselves to kind of, stay in and live temporarily. But with that comes, potentially operating some sort of a gas stove, or, maybe even smoking. And that's how the building catches on fire. So we've had a lot of issues with that. So if you are in an area where there's a lot of larger population of homeless, you want to make sure that you have cameras, you have some sort of a security patrol. Doesn't have to be a vendor. If it's a vendor, security vendor, even better. But if someone's just driving by regularly and the individuals in the area know that this building is being monitored, that is a huge advantage for the property. Obviously, like I said, having cameras, sometimes, I have clients that they may or may not have active cameras, but they have signs that say, this building is under surveillance. So that's a measure that I think anyone could take. And then there's so many other things, we talked about briefly about water damage and roof situation. So again, making sure, some of the windows and doors, check for the seals. Are they broken? Just visual inspection. None of these items really require a degree or, any sort of expertise. A lot of them are just visually done. As long as, there's some sort of a process in place that, you're on top of what's happening, and you get to see and inspect things as they happen. So you have a plan in place in order to mitigate, again, potential losses or claims.
So, Golnaz, let me ask you a question there on the inspections you talked about in the very beginning. That's better to have third-party inspections, right?
Sure.
Do you like to actually see records of those? Or what type of record keeping should our clients be doing when it comes to all of these maintenance inspections?
Absolutely. So we oftentimes ask for not necessarily proof. It's not just to prove it, but just to see what's been done and what's going to get done. It's a great way to understand, again, the level of maintenance that's in place. And that goes not just the, HVAC system or, your roof, but also sprinkler systems, or if you have a commercial kitchen, your ANSEL system. Those are required by code that they need to be inspected and maintained annually. So we follow NFPA, which is the National Fire Protection Association. Per NFPA, which a lot of the insurance carriers follow their rules and regulations, those systems, those fire protection systems would need to be inspected annually. So once they're inspected, and it's not something that gets done in-house, there has to be a certified or a licensed contractor to do that type of work. We definitely want to see a record of that. We want to make sure that not only it was done, but also It also shows us the frequency of the inspection, again, just for us to have a comfort level that yes, this maintenance is being done annually as required, but also to identify if there were any deficiencies within, within the report or during the time of the inspection, that those deficiencies or, any repairs that they needed to do have been rectified and resolved. So yes, we definitely would love to see any of those records as they are available. Sometimes, it's hard to dig into, all the paperwork and get some of those records to us. But as I mentioned, some of those, just because they're, they're kind of building codes and fire codes, we definitely require them, as opposed to, if you have a maintenance contractor that does building maintenance, we may or may not want to see that. As long as it's done and, visually we see that everything is taken care of and there are no obvious signs or deficiencies, we are okay with that.
Okay, good, awesome. Let's maybe go back to another topic that I think Adam brought up in the very beginning. He talked briefly about wildfires and how that's driven a lot of the the rate increases and whatnot. Is there anything specific to wildfires that we can talk about here? I know that's very maybe region specific or area specific, but what information could you give us on that topic?
Yeah, absolutely. One, just two things before we get into that. I just wanted to kind of hit on relative to what Golnaz just talked about. We've been throwing the term around a lot, older buildings. I think it's important that we define that. In the insurance world, an older building at this point is essentially anything over 40 years. So if you have a building that was built in 1984 or earlier, you're likely going to get a lot more questions around updates, or even as it approaches 40 years, you're going to get a lot more questions from the underwriting team about what type of updates have been done, the maintenance of the building, etc. The second thing is, Golnaz went through a number of different, whether it was the HVAC, plumbing, electric, roof. The ones that I would say, like, the insurance company is looking at first and foremost when a risk comes in. Number one is the roof, for a number of reasons. We talk a lot about fire, but really the larger loss driver right now is water losses. That's what we tend to see more than an individual building just burning down. And water essentially gets into your building or becomes an issue one of two ways, whether it be your roof or your plumbing system. So first and foremost, the roof is going to be looked at, and it's looked at because it is such a big driver of property losses, particularly water losses. But number two, it's really easy for us to look at. Google now updates in most places their aerial maps 3 times a year. We can zoom in very easily on that roof and get a accurate, up-to-date indication of what that roof actually looks like. So, if you do have a roof that is deficient, particularly over a larger structure, that could be an issue as far as getting insurance. That can be an issue as far as paying a higher rate, and it'll certainly be something that'll be inquired upon. And then the same thing with the plumbing system. As you butt up to 40 years, look, we got heavy metals in the waters in the Southwest, Arizona particularly. It really deteriorates PVC piping, so you'll likely get a lot of questions around that as well. We don't have as much of the the pipe freezing and bursting in the state of Arizona, but we definitely have issues with joints coming apart, and likely why we get a lot of questions around that. Now over to wildfire. So wildfire has been a very active topic in my world over the last number of years, particularly with me working in the states of Arizona and New Mexico, just because of the amount of fire activity that we've had. You asked the question, Dan, like, is there things that can be done? And yes, there's certainly things that can be done on individual risk, but I think it's important to level set that there's certain risks that no matter what you do are going to be very, very difficult to place just in the current wildfire environment. So just from a short Cliff Notes version, wildfire risk is scored 0 to 100. I don't know why they say 0, because I think 6 is the lowest score you can actually have. But you can have scores that go all the way up to 100. So 6 being basically no risk. That would be center of Phoenix. 100 being in the center of the forest up in Show Low. If you have a high property load, when I say high property, high value building, and how do I define high value? really anything over 5 million, realistically, probably anything over 2 from a building value perspective, in what we refer to as an extreme wildfire zone. So scores of 81 to 100. Extreme zones are areas that are deemed the most likely for there to be wildfire activity. If you have one of those buildings, I would, how we term them within our book is an outlier. Like we look at that, something that is well outside of, regardless of controls that are in place, is well outside of what our wildfire appetite is. Those risks are going to be difficult to place. Just, regardless of how much you put into making it a better risk, it's still going to be difficult just because of what it is. But within that, stuff that's lower values and stuff that's, an 80 or below, and really just to also level set kind of where the wildfire scoring really picks up is at 60. So once you get north of 60, that's where you're kind of deemed to have at least a material wildfire exposure. 60 to about 80 is higher exposure, and then 81 to 100 is extreme. So let's start by let's just look at it. Let's just kind of use a case example here. You have $1 million building up in Pine Top. It's along the main drag, but it's a score of a 96. What are we going to be looking for? So, first and foremost, what is the construction type? That makes a big difference. Is it a masonry building or is it a frame? If it's a masonry building, it's something that we're much more open to considering because the combustibility of that structure is a lot less than it's a frame structure. Now, obviously, you can't easily change the construction type of your building. So what are some things you can actively do as a insured to help mitigate your wildfire exposure? So similar to roofs, like the first thing that we're going to look at, fire needs, several things. It needs a spark, it needs oxygen, and then it needs fuel. And what we're going to look at is how much fuel is around that structure. And how we define this or define this is like defensible space. Like how much space is there between your structure and the forest or additional sources of fuel? The best thing that you can do to help make your risk a more attractive risk is to create defensible space between your structure and the perimeter of the forest around it. So everything from clearing trees to big ones, not having combustible materials up along the building. There is statistical evidence that shows these 6 feet surrounding the building, and not that that's all you need to do, but the 6 feet that surround the building are the most important defensible space. Do you have mulch along the side of the building, or do you have a non-combustible rock, type of flower bed? Having the rock versus the mulch makes it a much more attractive risk because the stuff that's going to cause it's going to be the greatest potential to cause a fire is when those hot embers ignite stuff that is up along your building. The biggest thing, sprinkler system does not do any good with regards to a wildfire because sprinkler systems are designed to contain fires that burn the building from inside out. Obviously, a wildfire burns from outside in. But then, other things you can do as well is being more open to higher deductibles because, the reason for that is what we have seen is, knock on wood, we've had some close calls, but we haven't had a single structure burned down yet from a wildfire in our region. But what is much more common is smoke damage claims. And smoke damage claims are very, very, costly. Not as costly as a building burning down, but still costly. So what you will find is if you're more willing to take on a higher deductible in those locations that are wildfire exposed, that will likely give you some more options. So, as I said, just summarize, first and foremost, defensible space. If an underwriter looks at that structure and it's right up against the forest, you're going to have a heck of a time placing it. But if you do have a brush fire mitigation plan in place where you are actively removing trees and you are making sure that the area directly around the building is full of non-combustible materials, you have a much better likelihood of being able to place that risk and being able to place it affordably.
Okay, that's wonderful information. Thank you. Let's maybe switch to a related topic. I want to address maybe 2 things if we can at the same time: water damage prevention and fire prevention. We have clients talking to us about installing leak detection systems or the cost benefit of upgrading fire suppression systems. What in your experience, how much benefit can really be gained from upgrading those systems, and what is considered too vintage that has to be upgraded. Maybe speak to that a little bit for us.
Yeah, and this is a challenging question just because so much of it depends on what the risk is. So we'll try to talk through this a little bit to try to make as much sense as possible. Look, if you have what we would view as a low hazard occupancy, so you have like a office building, going to great lengths to install additional fire detection or fire suppression is probably not going to make that big of a difference, because from the company's perspective, that's a low risk hazard. Where you will see the greatest benefit is where you have high risk tenants or a high risk exposure and limited fire suppression controls. So, there'll be some things that are so far out there, like if you have a heavy manufacturing exposure that manufacturing process creates a high fire load and you don't have a sprinkler system, like that's going to be difficult to place to begin with. So like installing a sprinkler system would be highly beneficial. However, it's also highly costly to retrofit a building to install a sprinkler system. What I would say is there's certain things that if you don't have, it's going to make it challenging from an insurance perspective. Central station alarm, not just local alarms, but a central station alarm that goes to a monitoring company that in the event it goes off at 2 o'clock in the morning, that they can send the fire department out there to monitor the building. Obviously for heavier exposures that have fire load, having some way to properly contain a fire, whether it's you're manufacturing to have the self-enclosed units that in the event of a fire can close themselves off to keep the fire from spreading. And then just like the basic, like we say, the basic blocking and tackling. Like if you have flammable liquids in a structure, like make sure you're using the approved, the NFPA, as Golnaz mentioned earlier. Make sure you're using the NFP cabinets to properly be storing these things. Those are little things that are not very costly that you can do, that when a representative of a company goes to inspect the property, goes a long way. Like if we go there and we see flammable liquids that aren't being stored properly, that's a huge red flag. Not to say that you can't have tougher exposures. It's just making sure that you're doing within reason what is prudent to protect that exposure.
Great. Well done. Thank you. Maybe let's switch from the maybe some more physical risks to less tangible ones. Let's talk about different types of agreements. Lease agreements, other contracts. Are these a concern at all when it comes to lowering risks?
So absolutely. So I cannot understate the importance of having a strong lease agreement in place. This is, for all intents and purposes, this is your way to offload a lot of your exposure to other parties, and in turn not only make your risk a more attractive risk to the insurance company, but an adequate driver of paying less premium every year. So I'll kind of go through a couple of these. First and foremost, like when you have, and I'm just going to talk about this we do this one of two ways. We'll talk about this in both ways. So like whether you're a lesser's risk account, that's your building owner that is renting your building to another entity, or an apartment risk where you have individual renters. So like first and foremost, you definitely want to have lease agreements with both parties, and the lease agreement, you want to mandate those, whether they're tenants or individual businesses that are renting space from your building, have proper insurance in place. So the next question you'll always get is, it's not just enough to have the lease agreement that indicates they have to do that, but what are you doing to make sure that they actually are purchasing the insurance? So, obviously we see that a lot more in the commercial space than we do in any type of app situation, but it's so important to make it a part of your process. Like from an underwriter's perspective, if you can show that you're going through the process of collecting certificates of insurance and making sure that everyone has insurance in place, that's a huge driver for making yourself a more attractive risk. And then from there, having a certain amount of whether it's, and it's going to be different, whether it's whether it's a habitational building with personal renters or it's a commercial business, number one, making sure that they have enough insurance in place. If your insurance company has, let's just say you have we'll make it easy, like a commercial strip center, and you have they have $1 million of GL limit, and they have a $10 million umbrella over top, so they have $11 million. If you're only requiring your tenants to have $1 million policy, that's not as attractive as say you're requiring them to have $1 million policy, maybe a $3 million umbrella. Because in the real world, a lot of times, anytime there's a dispute between a claim, the claim gets prorated between the two carriers, and it's prorated based on the amount of limit that you have. So like, if I'm sitting here in the carrier, it's like we got 11 million and the other party's got 1 million, regardless of how much fault we are, we're going to end up eating the majority of this because we have 11/12 of the limit that's available on this policy. So that's, making sure that your tenants have sufficient limit, number one, and then making sure that whether it's a hold harmless agreement, or the big one is the additional insured and this is more for your like commercial, lesser's risk accounts, making sure that your tenants are naming you an additional insured and they're agreeing to defend and indemnify you in the event of a loss. So basically what you're doing is a loss that your tenants are responsible for, they're going to name you as additional insured on your policy, and they're going to provide you as the building owner, when you get named in the lawsuit, a defense, which is huge. The one caveat that I will throw out there, and we've seen this more and more since COVID, is there's and I'll get the verbiage a little crossed up, but some of you may recognize what I'm talking about. There's a blur that we've started to see in these lease agreements that basically says, if there is a insurance policy that responds to a property loss, whether it's for the tenant or whether it's for the building owner, we waive our rights of subrogation against one another. I will tell you, as a building owner, you're not doing yourself any favors by putting that in the agreement, because then we view it as the company. We say we've just lost our right of any subrogation for a loss that's totally the fault of one of your tenants. I say it's changed a little bit since COVID, obviously with what's going on with the challenge in getting tenants since COVID. This is one of the things that we've seen in a way to make it a little bit more attractive for potential renters. So look, do we write accounts that have that verbiage in it? Absolutely. I'll just tell you from our perspective, it definitely, we view the lease a little bit differently in that scenario.
Okay. Let's, and our time's starting to get a little short here. Golnaz, could you speak to us a little bit about maybe let's look at like hotel spaces where we have pools, maybe sport courts and other kind of ancillary risk areas. What are some things with those types of properties that managers can do to mitigate some risks?
Sure. So when it comes to this topic, we have to look at it from two different perspectives. One, from a property standpoint, and then secondly, from a general liability standpoint. And I think the risk associated with general liability, meaning that something happening to a guest or somebody misusing the facility just because no instructions were provided, I think it's a greater risk. So we'll just put more emphasis on that for the sake of this conversation. So let's say a hotel, it's very typical for hotels to have a pool, whether indoor or outdoor, maybe a small gym or workout area. So the things that you should keep in mind are, your workout area. I think for the most part, the hotels have a very small area, so it's not very extensive. However, you want to make sure that the door is locked. So, because usually the workout areas are on the main floor, so a lot of people can easily access it by design, but the door has to be locked. It can only be accessed through the guest room access, card access, and that just post basic rules and regulations of using a gym. Very basic, that you have to, if you're a minor, you have to be accompanied by an adult or, a parent, legal guardian, or that, using any specific equipment, maybe a treadmill or elliptical, if it requires any sort of instructions, you post that as well. the weights have to be put back on the rack, things like that. So again, this is just to notify the general public that these are rules and regulations. And then, by the way, if any claims arise from that situation, we are able to defend and say that, well, we did what we could have done in order to, make the general public aware of the situation and the things that they should be responsible for. So that's about the gym. As far as the pool, I think there are more things that need to be done with regards to the pool. One, that if you're talking about an outdoor pool, it has to be fenced off. Whether, honestly, any pools, even within a commercial residential property, pools have to be fenced off. Secondly, again, rules and regulations of using the pool. There are a set of just very standard regulations that anybody can find them easily by just doing a basic Google search. That also has to be posted. Marking of the depth marking of the pool, that has to be, when a pool gets built, especially for commercial purposes and commercial use, those a lot of the things that I'm mentioning kind of come with the pool, but you just have to make sure that, let's say if the surface was repaired or the surrounding area around the pool was repaired, you don't want to get rid of that depth marking. So that also has to be there. And then we can go as far as talking about, making sure that there is enough or appropriate equipment for handicapped individuals, ADA compliance and things like that. If there's a hot tub, you want to make sure that there's an emergency shut off button. The pool water has to be tested for an obvious reason, at least daily. It's really important to keep a log of that that testing that's being done. I think within the industry, we've seen several claims where someone claimed that they got sick from the pool water, and the property owner was not able to prove that the pool was inspected regularly and the pH level was tested regularly. So those are really not anything costly. It's part of the whole maintenance that we keep talking about, that property owners need to keep in mind in order to keep the guests safe, also keep themselves out of some sort of liability exposure that they didn't even anticipate. And having lights, exterior lights, again, if we're talking about a pool, very important. Walking surfaces, even, you don't want to have any cracks, any uneven surfaces. So those are some of the very easy measures in order to protect yourself from a liability claim.
Okay, thank you. So maybe just recapping a few things that you said, for any type of outdoor play facility, or even like general use areas like barbecue areas or dog parks, you can still apply the same principles of needing to post rules and regulations and also control access.
Absolutely. Rules and regulations and expectations. I mean, if we're talking about a barbecue area, I think it's more important to basically talk about expectations of how to start the barbecue, how to shut it off, making sure it's shut off, making sure if it's a gas fire, barbecue grill, what to do with the gas valve, who's responsible for making sure that, all the valves are working appropriately. And if something needs to be changed, again, who is responsible for that? Because those kind of go back to the general maintenance of the building that we talk about, but those are the areas that unfortunately we see claims. And in my opinion, and I'm sure Adam can attest to that too, those are some of the easy things that every property owner can do to protect themselves and also to help themselves get out of a liability or a property damage claim situation.
Okay, well, wonderful. Well, Golnaz, Adam, this has been absolutely fantastic. As we kind of wrap things up, do either of you have any closing thoughts or things that have come to mind that you want to share?
From my standpoint, I would just say that, everything is changing, the environment's changing, when it comes to, Adam alluded to some of the changes in the market. So with some of those changes, there are some, regulations that come in play. When it comes to my line of work, I always tell the policyholders and property owners that I understand their focus is to run a business and not to, not to take care of their building. That's not the only focus that they have. So, tap into your resources, whether it's your insurance representative, your broker representative, tap into your resources, try to educate yourself on what needs to be done, and stay proactive, stay on top of the things that need to be done, because if your property is not insurable, it just puts it puts a dent in your financials. So anything you can do in order just to make small changes as you go, or just be proactive, can go a long way.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, it's when the insurance company is making recommendations about things that need done, they're doing it because it's something that we view from our perspective that absolutely has to be done. This is a partnership between the agency, the carrier, and the policyholder. And we're in the business of writing insurance. Like we want to be able to insure your business, but we just need to make sure that it's at a point that it makes sense for all of us. So like what you'll find is we're more than willing to provide assistance along the way, provide input along the way, explain why we're looking for what we're looking for and why we are. And as I said before, there may be situations where it's just really not feasible. The example of a building that needs a sprinkler system and it doesn't have it, to be retrofitted. But most of the things that we recommend, or the things that we try to advocate for, are things that are in line with what can get done. And as I said, like we're more than willing to work with you in this process because it is a partnership.
Certainly is. All right. Well, thank you again. We appreciate both of you so very much lending your expertise and time this morning. All right. Well, we will go ahead and call it a day. Golnaz, Adam, thank you very much. We appreciate you.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you guys.
us.
Appreciate your time.
Have a great
Bye.
day, everybody.